Good evening, Angskar. I know it's a little late in the UK, and thank you so much for taking time to talk to me today. So first of all, I want to start off with asking you to introduce yourself and a little bit about the work you do.
Sure, Swati, and thank you very much for this invitation to speak. So my name is Ansgar Kuna. I'm the Global AI Ethics and Regulatory Leader at EY, which means that within the company, really, I help with setting up our governance frameworks around AI, things such as assessing projects that are being proposed by various subgroups within the company who want to perhaps propose using AI within the company, or perhaps developing a new set of tools. And really, how do we evaluate whether these particular projects are good projects for us to engage with? How do we try to anticipate whether they might generate potential problems in the long run and would end up being a project that might need to be canceled because of those kinds of concerns? The other part is engaging with our consulting activities. So EY does a lot of consulting for other companies as well to help them with bringing on board new process streams, such as introducing an AI system. And as part of that, we have what's called the Trusted AI Framework, which is really helping think through the various stages of the life cycle of an AI project from the perspective of how to evaluate the regulatory concerns, compliance issues that might arise, questions around robustness of the system, but also questions around the ethical implications. Is there a potential for a negative impact on your reputation because of what you are doing relative to how it will be perceived and received by the society that you're engaging with?
Right. So interesting role there at EY. So tell me a little bit about your journey into the world of technology, as well as how did you become an ethicist? Because that's an interesting job we wouldn't have heard about 10 years back. So talk to me a little bit about that job and how you came about it.
Yes, indeed. It's not really something for which there is an established career path towards going into. And also, I hadn't really planned this particular pathway. So I started off actually in engineering, electrical engineering, control systems, looking at artificial neural networks and fuzzy logic, combining those to make more transparency into the kinds of rules that the systems are learning. But this was in the late 90s, entering into an AI winter. And as such, I actually switched into computational neuroscience for a time and spent time in academia working on the intersection between computational neuroscience and robotics. But in 2014, I started thinking more about data sharing, initially in the academic context, but started then thinking about computational social science, the use of online data to learn about humans and societal interactions and those kinds of things. And the project that I was working on was really meant to be looking at how to use those kinds of techniques, but quickly the focus shifted onto the privacy and ethical implications around the agency. Specifically with those types of approaches, you're looking to use data that exists online, that people have put online. For instance, when they're using social media, particularly Twitter is publicly accessible, a lot of the data. You are participating from one mindset of, well, I'm engaging in a conversation here. I'm really thinking of this conversation as a closed whole. And once this conversation is done, that's done really. But the data collection is tracking these pieces of information that I've provided over a long period of time, enabling the generation of a bigger model of who I am and those kinds of things, which we are seeing now being used, for instance, for targeted advertising. But this is completely not something that the user was considering when they were engaging with the platform, and which is also why the traditional consent methodologies doesn't really work, because when I'm confronting the consent box, even though, to leave aside the fact that I haven't read the terms and conditions, but even just from my general understanding, I'm consenting to something here. I'm thinking about my current interaction. I'm thinking, I don't really have the capacity to think of the wealth of information that gradually will accrue on the site following this one consent tick that I'm giving. So that's why consent things. So anyway, that research project then led into projects thinking about how algorithms, online algorithms like recommender systems, are shaping the environment that we're engaging with. And we really wanted to bring this kind of research finding out of the academic bubble and bring it into the industry and regulatory space. So my role on the project quickly turned into stakeholder engagement with industry and also with policymakers. And one of the ways of doing this is engaging with the development of standards. So industry standards around the use of these new emerging technologies, especially AI, which is really a way of formulating what the community considers to be best practice at this, at this point in time. And so really feeding into this shaping of what best practice looks like was our main route for engaging with industry. And so I engaged with the IEEE, particularly their global initiative on ethics of autonomous intelligent systems, which has a set of standards working groups in it, the 7000 series. And so within that, I'm chairing the algorithmic bias consideration standard. And so EY, they were building out their capacities around client technology, so technology development in this space. And so one of the leaders within that team at EY joined the IEEE standards working group. And that's actually how I got in touch with them. And initially they were asking me to perhaps do some consulting a couple of days to EY, but that then translated into, we actually need somebody on board who is more really, steeped in this kind of work. And so that's how I got invited to joining EY. But so it was not a particularly planned journey. It was more a journey that came out of first looking at what the technology can do, but then thinking about what the consequences are of this technology. And so, for instance, also engaging not just with the AI ethics discussions, but also with the broader responsible research and innovation discussions, which are looking at emerging technologies in different fields, including climate change related technologies or nanotechnology and those kinds of things. And really about the need to do foresight activities to think about if we do this, what are the consequences? And not just if we do this and everybody uses what I built exactly the way that I wanted to, but also what are other ways in which it's likely that this technology might end up getting used? And what are the kinds of consequences that might come out of this? So it's really, a lot of it is just thinking a bit more broadly about the project that you're doing, not just targeted at your particular use of it, but the wider how is it going to be received in society. So if one
interesting, I wanted to add a little bit point in your journey to become in this ethicist role at EY. You touched a few interesting things that I think are still not solved by any stretch of imagination. The thing about consent on social media, and I think what I would like to think of as second degree effects, right? So sometimes, obviously, some people do not read the terms of and conditions while you consent, but even if we do and we consent, we might be consenting, or in our minds consenting only for our actions at that particular time frame. But you touched a very important point. It's our historical actions. It's also our actions in correlation with other things, right? For example, if somebody can mine my Twitter feed to see what kind of political outlook I might have, that's totally in correlation with something else, which is emerging into some other conclusion, which I wouldn't have thought about. So very interesting work on the academic side that you have done. And I think it's very pertinent to the age we live in, where the social media is controlling narratives and even the way we think and act, right? Because the news stories are seeping into our minds, whether it is true or not. So I think it's a very, very important research topic that has to continue. But I really appreciate your work and how you entered into this role. So I just wanted to add that over there.
Yeah, and I think you make a very good connection there about the pervasive use of these technologies and also the networked way in which the data is flowing from one to another. But for instance, on the pervasive use side, I was recently talking on a podcast for the European platform for regulatory agencies around data, news curation, basically, algorithms and the curation of news content. But one of the things to think about is also not just the actual recommender system algorithm that's pushing the particular news item, but also the way in which the whole system is built to push news or stories at you at times when you weren't even thinking about this. So because the issue, for instance, there was around a critical assessment of the news story. And like, if I go to a site with the mindset I'm going to engage with a news story, I will be thinking in one kind of way. But if I'm just doing something and my phone pings up the message on the side, I'm just sort of peripherally noticing it, I'm much less critically engaged with what I'm seeing, but it is one of those messages that appeared. And as we know, one of the problematic things with trying to debunk fake news is if you mention it again during the debunking, you're actually reinforcing
propagating
it. Because you are mentioning it, and because to a large extent, human psychology is a bit like, well, I've seen it many times, so therefore it must be true, without having actually engaged with the thought process. It's the basis of a lot of advertising.
That and also the point that sometimes influencers, both good and bad, also propagate, right? And I don't even want to name names, but an important figure in US history is tweeting some misinformation. So people tend to believe it. So you make really, really good points there. And today, this day and age, it is controlling. I mean, the media, social media is extension of traditional media, but again, the fact checking is not enough. And I think one of the interesting things I read on a research paper is it's not enough that we deal with this issue just with technology. It's more than that. It's policy, regulation, and technology. And again, talking about the human-centric design, what do psychologists think, like you said? And there is a statistics out there that says that bad news spreads faster, right? It's just like fire, it spreads so much faster. So really things to think about. But in that context, yes, we all understand when it comes to social media platforms, but when it comes to business use cases in an organization, for example, if I'm using AI to predict the failure of my machine or HVAC system, or I'm implementing AI for something else like recruitment systems. So in an organization and a business use case, which is not so sexy, but still we have to consider the ethics. So why is it that organizations have to give importance to evaluate ethics and ethical outcomes of an AI system?
Well, there's really two dimensions, I would say, to this. On the one hand, ethics, it's a thinking about the values that you are standing for and to how you are really embedding those in what you are doing. So on the one hand, you need to have clarity as to what the values are that you as an organization want to have. And that's an important point that is sometimes not really thought about enough. And we get into conversations where people say, okay, so now we're going to want to use AI, so we need an AI ethics board. And then somebody eventually points out, but you don't even have an ethics board for your company as a general now you're going to have one for AI specific, but you don't have one for the rest of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So clarity as to what your values actually are, because this is part of the communicating also to your customers, be they other businesses or be they end users, as to what you stand for, what they can realistically expect from you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, matching up expectation with what you're actually doing is the core of building trust,
mm-hmm.
Which is an important aspect just for having prolonged engagements, getting repeat customers, etc. So, and that feeds into, you know, elements such as the robustness of the system and
mm-hmm.
Avoiding basically unintended consequences. You know, we have a lot of the discussion around of ethics focusing on things like bias in the systems,
mm-hmm.
such as discriminatory bias.
Mm-hmm.
But bias can also express itself in the sense that it's just not robust for certain use cases.
Mm-hmm.
It's been tested for the majority use case, but not for the minority one. When that happens, do you have guarantees about how it's going to behave? A lot
mm-hmm.
of AI systems, they gain a lot of their strength because they have nonlinear responses in there. But nonlinearities are tricky in the sense that they can also suddenly blow up in a different kind of direction. And
Correct.
if you haven't properly tested your system along all of the space that you're going to use it, something critical might happen.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the elements where the ethics discussion starts to connect to basically good systems evaluation and testing. There is no hard line between these two. But the other side of ethics is also thinking about how we as an organization ourselves, what our values are, thinking about what the values are of the stakeholders that we're engaging with,
mm-hmm.
which ultimately in a society is also, in the long run, where regulatory requirements are going to go. Because
mm-hmm.
effectively, legislation and regulation is a formalized reflection as to a societal consensus on values that the society wants to stand for. In a lot of things around ethics, that consensus hasn't been reached yet. It's still
mm-hmm.
a dynamic process that's going on,
mm-hmm.
but it is something, there is rapid movement happening there. There's a lot of activity in various governments to try to find out, you know, are the current regulatory requirements that we have in certain sectors, are they able to cope with the new challenges that come out of the use of AI? Are there certain aspects to AI that cross-cutting need new regulation or not? These
mm-hmm.
are still open questions, but they're being dealt with. And so as a company, to consciously engage with the question of, are we using this system ethically? Like, do we have sufficient transparency as to the rationale for why we're using the system, our reasons for optimizing to a certain type of goal, those kinds of things. Do we have clear justifications for those? Have we properly understood who the
mm-hmm.
users are and how we are assessing the data? All of those things will also ultimately help with compliance that is coming down the line in
mm-hmm.
the near future. And like I said, it's just core towards communicating with your customers to make sure that you will be able to maintain a good reputation and a trusted relationship.
I love that. I love a couple of things that you mentioned. One, you said trust and knowing your organizational ethics first to reflect in the solutions you put forward, to build that long-term trust with customers. And I would even say partners, employees, suppliers, and so on, the whole ecosystem. And always organizations talk about customer lifetime value. And I think that is very true in the statement you mentioned about building trust. But I also loved one point that you mentioned about regulations is a reflection of societal values, which is very deep. We forget that the policy and regulation comes from feedback, and policy and the regulation especially gets passed once your elected officials are fighting for that. So we forget that. And I really appreciate you bringing that to the forefront. And the other thing I think in terms of ethics, again, at some point the regulation around AI will become very localized, I think. One example I was reading, for example, the cars in Europe, or specific country in Europe, I forget, but they cannot have these huge metal bumpers at the back and the front because they cause harm to pedestrians. And that's a law in some countries in Europe, whereas in the US, it's not so much. So we are allowed a free hand to put in bumpers in front. So again, in that case, you're putting the pedestrian life at risk, because when hit with a bumper made of metal, the pedestrians' lives are always at more risk than the car itself or the person in the car. So when I read that use case, I thought, wow, this is an eye-opener that at some point, definitely there are certain use cases or aspects of the use case that will get localized. But in general, I think these conversations are happening with the regulators even before. I think they are going to play catch up anyway, but now they're forced to think about it. So very, very interesting points there. Thank you for that. So another question that comes to mind is that, yes, we are having a lot of these frameworks. And I know recently we had the good fortune of working together on the ethical AI framework for the US government, but can you talk a little bit about your involvement in the framework with the government of EU?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, back when I was working in academia, we were really interested in translating the research findings coming out of our work there to not just the industry, but also into the regulatory space. So one of the partners that we had invited to be one of the stakeholders in the project, so basically for us to disseminate information to, was the European Commission, particularly DG Connect, who are in charge of helping developing the digital single market, which is obviously where a lot of the AI activities are playing out. And so partially through that work, partially through potentially some of the feedback that we've been giving to parliamentary inquiries in the UK, I was invited by the European Parliament's research unit to prepare a report on a governance framework for algorithmic accountability and transparency. So this is the work that I then did with some colleagues, also from a colleague from the US. And really what we were focusing on is the questions about, first of all, understanding what type of transparency different parties will need to have, and the questions around how accountability can be allocated within sort of the chain of participants within an AI. So it's like the providers of the technology, the users of the technology, etc. And then basically, really, we did an assessment as to, the different global frameworks for doing regulation, starting from free market. What is the potential for market self-regulation through competition mechanisms, to things like company self-regulation and branch self-regulation, including standards, to co-regulation and government intervention, and really try to set out for the Parliament what are the potentials and the potential blockages towards being able to use that kind of a level of regulation. And we did recommend that there is a need for some level of state intervention in this. Our recommendation was generally to say it's better to focus on using the existing regulators within their sectors, because they have the expertise as to what is critical in a particular kind of an application, and to have potentially an additional body that will support with knowledge around what the challenges are that AI brings to the table, but less to try and do a cross-cutting type of AI regulator, simply because the same piece of AI algorithmic machinery in one use case can be completely harmless, and in another one could have potentially very dangerous consequences, simply because the thing that you're interacting with is very different. My extreme kind of example that I like to bring is, nobody cares if the AI that's driving a non-player character in a computer game is going to go wrong, because it has zero consequences for anybody. But if you were to use that same kind of thing in an autonomous vehicle or something, obviously questions need to be asked about this. So, but another dimension that we also touched on is the importance of transparency as to what's happening within the organization, and including the role of external parties, such as investigative journalism and academics, looking at it from a dimension that doesn't have just the inherent conflict of interest, if you want to call it that, of it's your sector that you're working in. And just reflecting on the fact that so many of the stories that have driven this reflection on AI ethics have only really broken and come through because of investigative journalism actions. The ProPublica case, for instance, looking at the Compass algorithm for assessing recidivism, you can argue whether or not their particular analysis was the best way of doing it, but the fact that it came out through them really raised a lot of thinking, and including academia. Many hadn't really been thinking about some of the problems, including how to crystallize the fact that if we're talking about fairness, we need to talk about which fairness. You cannot at the same time be unbiased on accuracy and unbiased on false positives and false negatives, unless you have a very specific case of that the underlying data is very nicely equalized, which usually is. So those types of things. And then third dimension that we talked about is the geopolitics, the need for really thinking at a global level around AI regulation because of the nature of this technology. It doesn't really look at borders, and also the potential nature of reuse in other kinds of spaces.
Correct.
And so we really were encouraging also the European Commission to be, Parliament and the Commission to pursue activities at the global scale, such as now the Global Partnership on AI, but also working at the OECD level, for instance, where I have the privilege of being allowed to participate on behalf of EY, for instance, in the business engagement side with OECD. And so, but that's going to be challenging, because how are we going to get the different starting positions from where Europe comes, from where the US comes, from where China comes. And then there's the whole global South or other kinds of countries who are more client countries to a lot of these technologies, but who also need to have a voice on the table when we're talking about how these things are going to be regulated globally. And so, unfortunately, we weren't able to give a very clear, this is what you should be doing, because frankly, geopolitics is very
again, we don't want to be prescriptive. So I think so many thoughts running in my head you touched upon and gave me, all these ideas and thoughts. So one thing you said was about different sectors. I think of AI as electricity. The electric grids are regulated differently than your light switch in your house, which is regulated very differently than electric cars. So I think AI is so generic and so many subfields. I totally think that future regulation has to do with the sectors, which ultimately boils down to the use cases. And the second thing that came to mind is about the ethics, right? When I think about ethics, what better examples than doctors and lawyers? because doctors and lawyers do follow that ethical code of conduct, and they are held by both formal and informal laws, especially when it comes to doctors. I say informal because when a doctor makes a diagnosis, we just as a patient take his word or his or her word for it and not like checking. But ultimately, if they might be responsible if they have really bad consequences. But again, lawyers also, I mean, for every person who is deemed guilty, they had a lawyer representing him or her. So I think where we are in terms of both academia and studies and computer science will follow some sort of that ethics course, because I think just like lawyers and doctors go through those courses as part of their curriculum, I think it will become very pertinent for us to introduce that in engineering schools as well, which will be very interesting times. The last thing about geopolitics, I think when you talk about geopolitics, there's a whole conversation around interoperability of data and how much of data you can share. Of course, there are international organizations like all the social media, Twitter and Facebook, who hold the data, but then there are others who are very regional and localized in terms of data. So I think that is a very interrelated conversation to have, because I know there are some activities done around the data interoperability and the data regulation across borders, but there's a lot more to be done, I think. So those were some thoughts running in my head when you were talking about those things. Very good. So just before we, finalize and wrap it up, one important conversation I wanted to have is about, yes, we have all these frameworks. We have at both national and international levels. We have a lot of research being done in academia. All the conferences, there's talk about ethics. But I feel like, and this is not just me, I think a lot of people in society feel, and they are seeing the impact of the ethics of just technology, some AI, some not so AI, when you talk about the social media controlling the narratives, and some AI use cases specifically like in law enforcement and so on and so forth. So what do you think we, as both, I'm a technologist and I'm passionate about ethics, but you are an ethicist, what do you think we should do in order to help society get to a place where we can say, okay, just like a lawyer or a doctor, this thing can be regulated and questionable in a court of law?
Yeah, so I think it's really good how you also pointed out it's not all just about AI. It's a lot about these types of digital technologies, computational driven technologies. A lot of the issues that we're actually talking about now are common across these. And to a large extent, the reason why we're having this very energetic discussion at the moment and a sense of the regulation needs to catch up is because a lot of these things that were already occurring before AI really became a thing were not being addressed. And we allowed a lot of these technologies to grow out, to have increasingly impacts on society, because we were still thinking of it like, well, that's just a computer, and what do computers do? Well, they do a lot nowadays.
Right.
But yeah, so how can we do, well, I mean, it's definitely true. The last couple of years have really been focusing on sort of the frameworks, the high-level principles, the getting to grips with what the problems are, and sort of the high-level position that we should be trying to take. But now is really the start of the change in what we're working on towards more of the, how do we translate this into practice? How do we make this something that we can actually implement? And so we're seeing things like the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK coming out with guidance on explaining of automated decisions that is really, trying to get into this, how do you think about the different types of explanation that different stakeholders need to have and those kinds of things. But even those are still too high level for direct implementation. So we need to go even more into that. And one of the things there is, as you hinted at, a piece of the education of the people who are working in this space, the computer scientists, the data scientists, the engineers, the business managers around this as well need to be thinking about the kinds of implication that it is having. And I think one of the things that we are starting to see as part of this is the need to broaden what people are genuinely learning when they're going to the, getting their education, sort of moving away a bit from the hyper siloification into something where you say, okay, you may want to be an engineer, but you still need to think about societal implications. So perhaps we should be teaching you something that is beyond the program. So it's something of a need, and it feeds into the broader the need that we've seen anyway in industry of people need to be able to talk across disciplines. So many things of what we're doing now needs multidisciplinary approaches. And that means people need to be used to the fact that, if you're having a different specialization, you have a different way of approaching issues, talking about those, and we need to, actually communicate. Perhaps that's a bigger picture for society nowadays, actually communicating. But there's also, and I think that it's something that we are together working on as well with this certification of people who are working in this space. The realization that there is no such thing as a global expert on AI. You are really an expert on the use of AI in this kind of field, or you're an expert on this particular element of the AI development chain, or those kinds of things, and recognizing that through things like certifications, so that when you're building the team, you know that you've got the right people on board, and you know where the gaps are that you need to be filling. And recognizing the interdisciplinary needs, like we need to understand our stakeholders. That means we need to get somebody who probably has more of a social science kind of background, understands those kind of methodologies, qualitative research, understanding of surveys, and those kinds of things. And so, yeah, there's a lot of building up to go there. Will this kind of engineering field become something where you need to be where there's an association that you need to be a member of, and if you didn't perform the right way, you might lose your membership and therefore lose your right to work there? Perhaps for certain high impact kind of domains of usages, it might be similar to the medical profession, where you can
very interesting sanctions against,
where you could get debarred or something like that. It's certainly not there yet. We don't really have a clear path towards something like that, but it is something that is starting to be discussed, and it may well become part of it. It might become part of legislation around this. That
first the legislation and regulation has to come before we can hold the feet to the fire. Great, wonderful. Thank you so much, Anskar. This was really good to have such an in-depth conversation with you. I know you will continue to do this amazing work because we need more people like you. And thank you for taking time to talk to me today, and I hope you have a good weekend.
Thank you very much, and looking forward to continue working with you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.